Welcome to the third segment of A Journey Through Assyrian History. In the last two segments, we explored how people have thought about Assyrian history and how Assyrian history really should be understood as a continuous phenomenon from the very ancient past until today. Today we will discuss how the Assyrians were discovered. Now, in Western literature and thought, the Assyrians were lost to history, the modern Assyrians that is, until they were discovered by the world, really by the West. But were they? Were the Assyrians really discovered? Not if we have a comprehensive view of world history. In the West, an evangelical reawakening was taking place in the 18th century. And this so-called reawakening or awakening led to the missionaries from England and the United States to venture into the Middle East and into the heart of Assyrian territories. In 1799, the Church Missionary Society of London was created. In 1804, the British Foreign Bible Society was created. And in 1810, the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions was established. A few centuries before the formation of these organizations, the Roman Catholic Church had been active in the Middle East through various societies. The Dominican Fathers, established in 1216, were part of this effort. And this was one such society, a very prominent one. In 1289, long before the split between the Church of the East, or within the Church of the East, which formed the Chaldean Catholic Church on the one hand, and the Church of the East on the other hand, the Dominican Fathers sent a mission to the Assyrians. So in 1289, long before the split took place, Father Recold of Monte Croce came to Mosul with a papal bull, or a decree, and attempted, but failed, to convince the Assyrian Christian mayor of the city of Mosul, a member of the Church of the East, to convert to Catholicism. In missionary activity, of course, the Assyrians themselves had outdone the West long before this. They had created in the Church of the East what was known as the Nestorian Church, the greatest missionary enterprise known to mankind. That was now in the long past. Things had changed drastically. Now, the British and the American missionaries and societies had an interesting take on the Assyrians, to whom they referred to as Nestorians, Chaldeans, and Jacobites. They sought to define them as if they were specimens in a jar, and then convert them to the true religion, which was a Western or American form of Christianity. The American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions instructed an Eli Smith and a Harrison Dwight in the 1800s to visit the Assyrians. The letter of instruction was very interesting. Quote, "A company of wandering shepherds will present themselves to your attention in Kurdistan," and that's spelled with a Koordistan. 100,000 of the Kurds are said to be Nestorian, subject to hereditary patriarchs. In addition, Smith and Dwight were instructed to look for a sect called Chaldeans, of course not realizing that the Chaldeans and the Nestorians were one and the same. They were the very same people, members of the Church of the East, and some who had affiliated with the Catholic Church called the Chaldeans. Was this really a discovery, or was it a display of a lack of knowledge of both the area and the peoples that lived in it? In 1831, Smith and Dwight reached the Assyrians of Urmia because that area was more accessible than the mountainous area in the Hakkari and Tor Abdin, for example. They were impressed with the liberal attitude the Assyrian Christians of the Church of the East had toward other Christians. Given this fact, Smith and Dwight felt that a mission among the Assyrians should take place and that no resistance will be formed and no objection shown to any such mission, particularly among the Assyrian Christians. Smith noted this strong desire to settle among the Assyrians, finding them to be the most interesting people in the world. More important than the discovery of the Assyrians was their utility. For Smith, the Assyrians of the Church of the East were a base for a mission to the larger Islamic world. Quote, a prop upon which to rest the lever that will overturn the whole system of Mohammedan delusion or Islamic delusion. He is lighting a fire which will shine upon the corruption of the Persian on the one side and upon the barbarities of the Kurd on the other, until all shall come to be enlightened by its brightness, and the triumph of faith will crown his labor of love. End of quote. This was what Smith described as the mission among the Assyrians. In 1834, encouraged by such words, the American mission was sent to Urmia to reside among the Assyrians. The head of the mission was Justin Perkins, who worked with the Assyrians for over 34 years, and whose mission was to use the Assyrians to influence, quote, the spiritual regeneration of Asia, end of quote. All other faiths were viewed as the delusions of Satan by the American missionaries. This, of course, would come to include other Christian groups. Perkins agreed with Smith that the Assyrians were situated in the heart of Islam and could be the starting point for the conversion of the world. 5 years after the American missionaries arrived in 1839, Dr. Asahel Grant arrived in the Hakkari Mountains and thought he had discovered in the Assyrians of Hakkari and Urmia the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and eventually published a book about it, something that no scholar would take seriously. Maybe at the time, but certainly not later. Grant, like Smith and Dwight, spoke of the Assyrians as possible missionaries to all of Asia. He states that the Assyrians, quote, eagerly drank the encouragements I presented. These encouragements, of course, were activities in the missionary field to Muslims, something that Smith himself was not willing to undertake, and in fact, never undertook. I said Smith, I meant Grant, but of course including Smith and others. The Assyrians at this time, being oppressed by Ottoman powers in the Hakkari, the Tur Abdin area, and the Nineveh Plain area, as well as in Urmi by the state of Iran, were in an insecure position and so welcomed the involvement of the missionaries as saviors of sorts, possibly in secular as much as religious endeavors. Having lived in what is today Turkey, Iraq, Iran, the Assyrians were certainly in desperate need of assistance. Like the Americans, the British were also to discover, quote unquote, the Assyrians. The Americans, the British, the Russians, and the French each sought their share of influence among the Assyrians for either religious or political reasons in their quest to discover them and have a place in the Middle East. In addition to the missionaries, Western adventurers also came to the Assyrians and discovered, quote unquote, the Assyrians. One such adventurer was Henry Laird, who arrived in the 1830s in Mosul. Quote, a deep mystery hangs over Assyria, Babylonia, and Chaldea. With these names are linked great nations and great cities, the plains to which the Jew and the Gentile alike looked as the cradle of their race, he wrote. He dug in Nineveh and, of course, vandalized Assyrian ruins in the interest of his patrons in England, not really in the interest of science or history. Regardless of his motivations, however, we can gather knowledge from his discoveries and observations. Assyria was becoming known in the West, not really discovered, but becoming known. Eventually, the Church of the East, that these missions were to support as a possible lever or base to overturn Islam in the East, was left in tatters, with each side pulling members and properties away or seeking to influence one faction against another in a political effort to gain predominance in the Middle East. This fragmentation among an ancient people that had survived tough times throughout the ages was painful, of course. A lesson was being formed among the intellectuals of the Assyrians. Unless and until we discover ourselves and know our roots, we will never achieve greatness. We will turn to the efforts of the early nationalists the next time and discover that which eventually will become a longer journey through history. See you in the next segment of A Journey Through Assyrian History.